Okay, we are recording.
Okay. Welcome to the May 20th meeting of the Marin Municipal Board of Directors regular meeting and Communications Committee. We are going to get going here, and I'm going to call for a motion to adopt the agenda.
Move approval of the agenda.
Second.
Okay, we need a roll call vote.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Chairman Kohler.
Aye. Thank you. This is now the moment for any public expression. Do we have any comments from the public on items not on the agenda?
We do not have any public expression.
Okay. That brings us to the minutes of the last meeting in December. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
Move approval of the December 10 minutes.
Second.
Roll call vote.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Chairman Kohler.
Aye. Okay, so we're going to now have our communications update. Jeannie, I assume you're handling that?
Yep, thank you very much. Okay, so let me get my screen going. Just give me 1 second. Okay, good morning, everyone. So since we just had an update a couple of weeks ago, what I wanted to use this time for was to just give you a brief update today on the website and on some of the other programs we're working on. I know Carrie is on deck right after this with information about rebates. So I'll let her take care of the outreach and the rebate program in her presentation. So our website is coming along great. We just completed the discovery and planning phases. And if you remember, that involved taking a real good look at our data analytics. And it also involved looking at other agencies' websites that have similar functions. And we also looked at other websites that we just felt were good examples for us. Part of this process also involved developing our user personas that really capture the needs of a variety of users. And as part of that process, we met with more than a dozen different departments and to really get their feedback on what their customers' online experience was. And that's everything from when you go online to buy a Watershed pass, to paying your bill, to when you work with engineering, for example, on upgrading your meters. So we really took a deep dive there to make sure we understood our customers' needs. We also completed the technical and functional requirements. And this involved looking at our existing site architecture, but also looking at areas to be captured for refinement. So is our bill pay portal working well? What can we do to improve it? We have a variety of forms on our website. We want to make sure that the user experience is a good one, because the last thing we want is for people to get frustrated and, just leave the site and try to do what they can do online in person. We also took a hard look at our document library. It's massive, as you can imagine. So we want to make sure that it's searchable and that our search functions really tie in well. And all of that really just leads to a more streamlined and enhanced process. And that in turn increases transparency, I think, for users. So just this month, we began the design development phase. And what that does is take all of those functional requirements and enhancements and just conceptualizes what the site will look like from that perspective, the overall user visual experience. So it involves looking at our home pages, our landing pages, and our microsites. And our board section will actually have its own microsite because of all the content. And that will really enhance user experience. So site wireframes are an important part of that design development. And what that allows us to do is look at the different paths so that it's more intuitive, it's more visual, and just creates the feel of greater access to information with fewer clicks, right? Because you don't want somebody to hunt for information that should be readily available. Again, the goal with the design is always to optimize for mobile and always to optimize for the user experience. And so content migration is also coming up. And this probably requires the heaviest lifting on our part. And if you've visited our website, you know, there's a lot of content there. There's a lot of redundancies. And our goal is to streamline everything, to create new and engaging content, and to really bring it all together with photos and digital assets that we're working on now, so that we can effectively tell our story. And we have a really amazing story to tell. So we want to make sure we do our very best in terms of the content. Once we get that in order, we'll be ready to start the beta testing with the board and other key stakeholders. And really this is, I can't overstate how important this is, because this will help us refine it so that the site on launch can be the real best that it can be. So we're looking forward to that. Mentioned our visual identity piece, and now that we're in the design phase, it's really imperative that we have our refreshed logo. And I sent some samples to the board earlier last week. So if you've had a chance to look at it, I hope that everybody is pleased. And here's just a sample of what that looks like. Just love the colors and the new font. I think it really modernizes the look. And so just a little bit about some of the other programs we're working on in addition to the website. So in the area of public affairs, in addition to some of the grants you heard about at earlier meetings, we also received a $150,000 grant from FEMA for our local hazard mitigation plan. And that's something that Mike Bond and his team will be working on. And staff also submitted a letter to our congressional leadership, and I shared that letter earlier with the board. It was signed by the general manager and basically advocates for support for federal funding for water districts so that we can help offset some of the cost related to some of the COVID-19 customer relief programs. We're also tracking in conjunction with Aqua, state, Senate, and Assembly bills. And the focus now is moving into the public safety power shutoff, the PSPS, potential stimulus packages that may come up.
I just wanted to, Jeannie, very briefly touch on that first bullet, the local hazard mitigation plan. By doing this, the board may be aware, it allows us to go after a number of FEMA grants that without having this plan in place were precluded from. So it's really a key step, and to have gotten a grant to develop the plan, it is a very nice win for us.
So one of the other things we're working on is really how we present and format our materials and information that goes to the board. Really, our board meetings are one of the key ways that the public has an opportunity to interact with the district. So we really want to make sure that we're presenting our materials in a clear, consistent, and thorough way that really truly reflects the importance of the work that the district does. And the quality of the work that the district does. So one final thing I wanted to mention are our customer bills. So we've heard from customers recently, and I'm sure you may have as well, asking questions about the billing and some of the fees associated. So we're going to revamp the design and the language of our current bills so that we do a better job, honestly, of explaining the fees, the charges, and the cost. We think that's important because once there's a greater understanding, we think that a sense of more transparency, and I really think that'll be helpful to so many of our customers. So what you see on your screen is an example of our current bill. Definitely time for an overhaul, definitely time to take a look at it. We started the process, and I'm really excited to bring this back to you when we're done so you can see some of the improvements there. I really think it will go a long way toward improving understanding and reducing some of the concerns that we're hearing now from some of our customers.
Just to, and I know the board members have heard a number of comments regarding meter fees and service fees and customers not really understanding the relative cost, because intuitively, and even some of the description in the back suggests it deals strictly with meter reading and meter replacement, and it doesn't make sense to be 40+% of the bill. So this really is an important effort, and Jeannie, as you can imagine, is already coming up with great language and just the visuals on the bill that's really going to address a number of comments that have come in over time from customers on this.
Thank you. And that's what I have. I'm happy to take any questions. Let me stop sharing
Great.
the screen here.
Thanks so much, Jeannie. I just have a couple. One first comment, I really like the new logo. I think I got back to Jeannie very fast with my particular recommendation. It looks like that's the one you showed as an example. What's your timing for finalizing that?
So right now, we plan to finalize it within the next couple of weeks. We'll go back to the designer, and one of the things I need to do is get a handle on the exact font that they use, because I want to make sure it's accessible so that when we replicate it, it'll be easy and cost effective.
Great.
We have a meeting with them actually this week, so we think that we should have everything pretty much tied up by early next week. We want to make sure that, again, we're doing it in tandem with this design phase. So
I do want to, if I could, just put a small footnote on the timing. We're working through what appears to be, but it's hard to tell, a small trademark and issue in terms of the name Marin Water. So there may be more to come, likely in a closed session with the board or not. But that would be the one small, hopefully, caveat in moving forward.
Great, thanks for letting us know that. And then my second question, Jeannie, you mentioned briefly data analytics that you looked at for the current website. Can you share any of that information? Because it's something I've wondered a lot about. You know, even though we all agree the website needs updating, we have put some effort into it in the past, so it'd be great to know what the baseline is. So if you've got any of those numbers handy, or if you wanted to send them to us separately, if you don't have them handy, but it would be great to have a sense of, you know, where we are and what our goal is.
Sure. So I can give you some preliminary numbers, and happy to parse that any way that you would like. So generally, our website gets an average of about 8,000 to 8,300 hits a month. The most popular spots that we see people going to are Waterwatch, Watershed. And so one caveat that I have that we haven't been able to resolve so much with the data analytics currently provided is that we can't decipher if the ISPs for the hits are coming from internal or bots. And so the reason I think that the Waterwatch page garners so many hits is because it's updated every day, and the crawlers go out there and push out that information. So that, to be fair, would probably account for a chunk of that, but it's still really well trafficked, and the Watershed course is always quite popular. So then with updates like the coronavirus material, I think I mentioned last week that that's getting a lot of traction as well. So it depends on timing, but on average between 8 and 8,300 average hits a month. And I think that's a baseline that we expect to certainly see go up with the new website. One statistic that I want to mention as I was looking at this is that we seem to have a pretty sticky website, which means people are spending time who come. Minutes is pretty sticky for somebody to be on a website, and we exceed 2 minutes regularly. So that tells me that the users who come are using it for a function, whether like paying your bill or visiting the watershed, or if we have volunteers out there. So I think the utility is there, the organization can improve, and certain metrics will improve.
And what's your goal, speaking of the metrics? If we're right around, you know, 8,000 or 8,300 now, where would you ideally like us to be a year from now?
I think that the 8,000 honestly is low, quite low. I think it should easily be doubled. I think what we'll see initially is a big spike, and then we'll see an evening out. And then with strategic content and strategically using things like social media to push more people to the website, I think we can easily see those numbers grow at least threefold. And that's just from the experience that I've had. I think one reason it's low is that it's a hard site to navigate.
Right, it is.
Is. Even the document library is a wonderful resource. So before we start pushing people aggressively to the site, which is the focal point of any campaign or marketing effort or outreach effort, we want to make sure we have a really good site, because you get one chance to make a good first impression.
Right.
That's why this is so important, right? We want to make sure that we hit the ground running, build the momentum, and continue to grow. I really see this website growing exponentially every year with the right content and the right management.
Those are my questions. Any other board comments or questions on this item?
Do we have any kind of interface for ADA, Americans with
Yes.
Disabilities Act?
Oh, absolutely. The site is required to be ADA compliant. And I think we talked about the various levels at our previous meeting, but it will be ADA compliant. We're also looking at some of the existing documents on our website. Now, we're not required to go all the way back and change those documents, but we are required to be mindful of the new documents that we post forward, which means that those Adobe documents need to be created a little bit differently so that they can be accessible to sight readers and all of these kinds of things. So we're definitely keeping that top of mind. And the new site, of course, will have greater functionality where people who do have disabilities, who have the ability in their own computers, can activate certain functions so the site can read the documents to them, for example. So yeah, we're really making an effort on that. And this consultant has done amazing work in terms of ADA.
Great, great. Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Any other board comments?
Nope.
Okay. Do we have any public comments on this item?
We have no public comments.
Okay. Thank you, Jeannie. I think that brings us to our next item. This is really great work, by the way. I really appreciate your keeping us updated. I'm very excited about where this is going and can't wait to get 16,000 hits. That's great. So this brings us to Carrie and the water efficiency program update.
Let me just pull up my screen here. All right. Oh, you all should be able to see it. Good morning.
Morning.
Chairwoman Kohler and members of the board. Carrie Pollard with giving a water efficiency program update. So here's a quick outline of what I'm planning on covering. The program updates for the new programs the board approved back in March. Talk a little bit about current water demand use patterns that we're seeing, and then finally wrap up with an update on making conservation a California way of life legislation. So we'll start with the laundry to landscape Graywater kit. So the district has entered into an agreement with the Urban Farm Store in Mill Valley to offer training workshops for our customers. It's a 90-minute training where customers can go in and learn about the rules around installing Graywater systems, especially laundry to landscape systems, how to do those installations, and then also they would be able to get a subsidized kit for doing the installation at their home, meaning that the district will pay $100 for that kit, and then the customer would be obligated to pay approximately $60 for them to receive the Graywater installation kit. We've modeled this after SFPUC's program that they also did with the Urban Farmer Store, and we're kind of leveraging the lessons learned from San Francisco's program, including offering loaner kits for providing the tools needed to install these systems to really simplify the process for the do-it-yourselfers within the community who may want to pursue this program on their own as opposed to hiring someone to do the installation for them. Next program that's rolled out is the Watershed Approach to Landscaping Garden Grant Program. So the board approved offering $5,000 to community organizations that want to install demonstration gardens within our service area. We did receive our first formal applicant, which is the Homestead Valley Community Center. They've submitted their application, their landscape irrigation plan, their planting plan. They've got kind of going through the process with us as our first applicant. it was, full steam ahead until coronavirus hit, and they've slowed down, but they are still engaged and excited about installing a garden, a demonstration garden. It's right along the road and easily accessible. They have a number of community events there each year, and they actually do an art trail sort of event there. And so I think we'll get some good opportunities for folks to get out and see that demonstration garden once it's installed. That was just our first inquiry or application. We've also heard from a few other locations, including the Corte Madera Fire Station. So we'll continue to do outreach around this program to community organizations, and of course notify the board and staff management when we receive applicants through this program. Rain barrel and cistern rebate, another new program that rolled out. This one actually rolled out in April. It's a 50 cents per gallon incentive for installing a rainwater harvesting system. When it rolled out in April, it was fairly dry. It didn't make sense to do a whole lot of marketing around a program when there's around a rain barrel program when there's no rain. But we were able to leverage the rain that we got in May to really promote the program. It was great to work with Jeannie and her team to get some social media posts out, letting customers know about this opportunity. And actually within the last 2 weeks, since we have had some rain, we've actually received a handful of applications. So folks were, seeing the rain and acknowledging that they have an opportunity to capture some of that for their summer irrigation needs, which is the goal, which is great. Another new program, this one just launched on May 15th, just last Friday. It's a Landscape Your Lawn Turf Conversion Program, as the board approved again in early March, with two options for participating in removing and replacing existing lawn with low water use plant materials. The first option is a $1 per square foot rebate, a direct rebate for customers who are interested in hiring someone to do the work for them possibly and just want to receive a rebate. The other option is to receive free sheet mulching material, which includes cardboard, compost, and mulch, which would be delivered to their homes or their site, within our service area, of course, plus a free irrigation conversion kit. This is another program we've been working with communications on, getting some marketing pieces out and running some ads and pushing it out through social media. So we'll see more of this, as we move forward. As far as outreach opportunities. But again, it just launched last Friday, so no rebate, no incentives have been issued yet, but the marketing has started, and we look forward to seeing the uptake within turf conversion programs. Finally, the Smart Irrigation Controller Program. The district, again, on the 15th, just last week, launched a $100 rebate for installation of a WaterSense certified irrigation controller. There are 28 manufacturers that are on this on this list that have eligible controllers, and that provides a total of about 700 controllers that are eligible for our program. So there's a number of various options to meet all of our customer needs. The way this rebate would work, obviously they would make the purchase and then submit their application. We would cut the customer a check for $100. In addition, we are still working on, under development, the regional ratio program. We were hoping to have that roll out simultaneously with our rebate program, but it didn't work out with coordination within the region. We are still working on that. So once that actually is up and running, we'll definitely let the board know. In the meantime, though, if folks want to purchase a ratio controller, they can do so and receive a $100 rebate. So we still could get some controllers in. We just won't receive notification up front that they've made that purchase, which is the benefit really of that point of purchase program, is we can see them coming on board and know who's going to be doing those installations kind of in the moment. So we can track installation and all that other, all those other metrics. So those are the new programs that we're rolling out. So I'm going to just stop there before I move on to AMI and other items to see if there's any questions. I've got a pretty beefy presentation here.
Great, thanks, Carrie. I do have a couple of questions. My first one is just a comment, which is, this is fantastic. 5 new programs all at once. I just think this is great. So my first question for you really, and Jeannie, is this a good moment? I know we just did an op-ed in the IJ, but for some sort of piece, because even though these are all separate programs, what's fantastic about them is that there's a bunch of them that we're rolling out all at once. So we're giving our consumers on both the business and the residential side a lot of options. Maybe you don't want to change out your turf, but you do want a rain barrel or a Graywater or whatever it is. So I think the moment is really a good one to be, going out and kind of packaging all of these together and in some way. So I don't know if that's an IJ op-ed, given that we just did one, or something else, but would love your thoughts on that.
I actually think that's a great idea, and definitely will connect with Carrie. I love the idea of packaging them together, sort of pick the program that's right for you. But I think on a broader level, it shows that even during this pandemic, we're trying to be as innovative as we can, rather, moving into the summer and being really water efficient. So I totally agree. Wonderful.
Yeah, especially since we might be looking at a pretty serious drought. We're okay because it rained a lot last year, but so I think there's a chance for that double message. And then my other question for you, I'm sorry, go ahead. My other question for Carrie is, I love all these programs. For each of them, do you have a goal? Is there, some level of participation that you're shooting for, like some number of, Graywater packages, some acres of, turf changed out, some number of rain barrels? When you say you learned a lot from San Francisco, I just wondered if that was part of what you're looking at, because my understanding is that it was a good program, but their participation was very light.
Yeah, so at this point, what our targets are really tied to the budget approval that the board accepted when we brought the programs before you. So there are various levels that we've projected and we'll continue to track, not to fully acknowledge that while that's kind of our target and what we anticipated, if we see strong participation, then we will definitely come back and allow the board to provide input in determining whether or not we want to continue to expand those opportunities. But really our goals are tied to budget approval. And I can send them out to you if you'd like. I don't know them off the top of my head for each one.
I just don't remember them offhand. So I think that would be great.
Sure.
Is there some, the other board members be interested as well. Great to know what we're shooting for.
I have just a comment, actually, that apparently the garden shops right now, in the face of the virus situation, they're doing a booming business. So apparently people have time on their hands and they're putting it to this kind of use. So yeah, our timing is good there.
I've heard that too, Jack. I've heard that some of the stores are actually running out of dirt and mulch.
Yeah.
Really fascinating. Just like yeast or wipes or something. Anyway, so but it's good to know that people are in their gardens.
I wouldn't be that the IJ is running out of op-eds too. So
yeah.
So I just had a suggestion on like the rain barrel rebate to maybe reach out to the vendors. So the vendors have that opportunity. So there's a lot of out-of-county vendors. I don't know, because they're so huge, they're not, a lot of times they're out in like Sonoma where it's a little less expensive, but maybe we should also be providing them our link so that, Marin customers can get, right when they go to purchase, they can see there's an opportunity there. So we kind of get them coming and going.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. We did notify the local nurseries and irrigation supply houses, et cetera, that these programs were launching, but reaching out to vendors that are outside of the county were, especially for rain barrels, because you're right that they're not necessarily going to be procured within the county. So it's
and also
we can reach out to them as well.
Yeah, give them a link so that people can see, because that's a good discount that we're providing. So.
All right, great. I'm going to move on.
Great.
So an AMI update. So the board is aware that we're in the middle of installing phase 2 and phase 3 of our AMI pilot programs, which are both grant funded. We did have to take a short break during starting in mid-March due to COVID. So those installations stopped for about, until early May. And really for the update, I want just to acknowledge that we are transitioning into phase 3. So we've kind of put phase 2 on hold to transition to phase 3 to ensure that we can finished phase 3 installations to meet the grant deadline, because of course phase 3 grant deadline is sooner than phase 2. So when we did take the break, we acknowledged that while we anticipate still being able to meet the grant deadlines, we just want to make sure that we meet phase 3 because it will end sooner. But you know, meter installations are back on track, and they're moving along steady. Crews are making phone calls to customers prior to, you know, to ensure that they're not going to impact having the water turned off during the shelter in place. And so there's a number of systems that we've put in place to keep these installations moving along in light of the grant funding. And in other news around AMI, we've initiated a feasibility study. We've hired a consultant on Schillinger to assist the district in evaluating our long-term approach to AMI and really working with us to do the analysis around cost benefit and types of programs or types of hardware that would make the most sense to the district, and working with us to do this feasibility study so that we can get a game plan in place as we move forward.
It looks like you have plenty of time to meet the phase 2 deadline, but I'm just wondering if you're seeing any you know, flexibility there in light of the COVID issue and how that has held us and everybody else up.
For phase 2, we are seeing some flexibility. For phase 3, it's actually written into the legislation that it needs to end. The deadline's a hard deadline because this is 2015 grant funding. But for phase 2, we are seeing some flexibility. But I think we were going to be able to meet it. We're not going to ask for it unless we know we need it. And we have to keep in mind this is IRWIMP funding. So, you know, we are one of 19 projects within the Bay Area. You know, so others may need to get an extension, and we would leverage that as well if given the opportunity.
Perfect. Okay.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about current water use demand patterns. So let me walk you through this graph a little bit before we dive in a little deeper. So this is gallons per capita per day for our district customers, starting back in mid-90s. This calculation was done as part of the 20 by 2020 analysis that we provided to the state. And so while it is gallons per capita per day, we use the methodology that the state established for that 20 by 2020, and that is total production divided by population. So as we talk about the numbers, I don't want you to think that this is residential use. This is total production divided by population, okay? So let's dive into it a little bit more. So if you look from the early 90s, or excuse me, the mid 90s to, you know, 2008 or so, our historical average was 148 gallons per person per day. So again, not residential, total, right? And then we saw the economic downturn, the recession in 2018 through 2011. We saw a significant dip in water use, and per capita, of course, dropped. As the economy rebounded, we saw in 2013 that it peaked up to about 138, and then the drought hit, right? And we see the drop from about 138 to our lowest per capita that we saw in 2016 of 108. Significant drop there. And now what we're seeing over the last couple of years is a rebound, right? We fully acknowledge that there would be a rebound. It's expected after a drought that there be a certain level of rebound. And that is primarily because, you know, when customers make behavioral changes that we call for during a drought, those habits fall away. But yet the hardware changes, the hardware efficiency, long-term changes that we invested in during that time period would remain. So we do anticipate seeing a rebound, and it's normal. It's not, it's expected. It's something the rest of the region is seeing as well. It's not unique to the district. I also want to call out that as we see this rebound, in 2019, we're at 120 gallons per capita per day. Our goal for 20 by 2020, as assigned by the state, is 124 gallons per person per day. And so while we are coming closer to that number, I don't anticipate us exceeding it. I think that we're in a good shape to be able to meet that 2020 target as assigned by the state. But it also is an acknowledgement as we move forward and we look at the new legislation, which I'll go into a little bit more detail on in a moment. The new legislation for making conservation a California way of life will not establish a threshold higher than 124, right? So the state won't say you get to have 125 gallons per person per day or higher, right? It's going to either be more efficient or equal or lower, right? And so because the target or the goal for that legislation is really to increase efficiency. And so I just really wanted to talk a little bit about, or bring this before you and let you see that we are continuing to track water use patterns and ensure that we are compliant with legislation and also looking at our long-term goals. I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions on this before I move on. No? All right.
No questions, but this is really helpful. I haven't seen this information put together exactly this way. So I think this chart in particular about the current water use demand should go on the website, and with your very clear explanation that this is not household use, that will, you're right, that's where people will tend to go. But I think
Right.
I would definitely get that on the website, with maybe even rename it, right up there in the title, what it does and doesn't include. But it's helpful and super clear. Thanks.
Yeah, I can work with Jeannie on coming up with something that makes sense to folks. And then so I want to move on to irrigation, because I think that this is something that the board has seen, and I know Paul's discussed extensively with all of you. This is a graph showing a comparison of 2019 versus 2020, January, February, and March water use for our dedicated irrigation meters. And it just goes to show that, when that precipitation stopped in February, irrigation immediately started. And what I really thought was interesting in looking at this data is that this is from our AMI customers, and that the ability for us to have access to this level of information to track emerging trends is really key to being able to effectively communicate with our customers and see where water use patterns are moving to. And just wanted to just briefly show this so that I thought it's very interesting, very, very interesting as we progress, and AMI is more of a resource for us. All right, now we're going to jump into legislation. So just a quick primer on what's happening under the Making Conservation a California Way of Life legislation. So this was passed in 2018, and it's really meant to continue the state's stance and the state's progress on moving towards a more efficient water use patterns and leveraging the 20 by 2020 goals that have already been established. It's also meant to acknowledge the need within the state for there to be a local and regional response to droughts as opposed to a state mandated response to droughts. And so there's a number of items within this legislation that are meant to provide for more long-term, locally focused responses for water use and also drought response. So the legislation establishes a budget-based water use objective. And so this is going to be like essentially a target where we need to hit. So similar to our 124 gallons per person per day for 2020, for 20 by 2020, this establishes a new budget-based objective. And that budget-based objective is a combination of indoor water use, outdoor water use, and water loss. And so it will be calculated for each water provider by the water provider using the state's methodology. And compliance, of course, is based on the entire utility. It's not customer by customer, right? You may have heard some of the concerns a couple of years ago when this legislation came out of folks saying, well, if I take a longer shower, am I going to get in trouble? Am I going to be fined? No, this is a utility, an aggregate for the entire utility. So I'm going to dive into each of these items in a little bit more detail. So for outdoor water use, the state legislation actually calls out that 55 gallons per person per day will be the target for our customers, for every customer within the state. This is meant to acknowledge that if you're in San Francisco and you don't have a landscape, or you're in Marin and you do, you should still use 55 gallons per person today is an efficient level of water use that the state has deemed acceptable.
Well, for indoor use though, right? This is
indoor only.
Right, this
indoor
is
only.
And it's only for residences. So unlike your chart, this is only for residences and only indoors.
Exactly.
And also, not to show off, but this is just a continuation of the status quo. This does not change anything that happened before 2018. This was already the standard.
To a certain extent, yes. And then in 2030, they drop it down to 50 gallons per person per day. So it will continue to be ratcheted down as efficiencies in hardware and fixtures improve. So now jumping into outdoor water use. So the standard for outdoor water use is based on climate and the amount of landscape area, right? So the key, we have access to climate data readily available to everyone within the state, but the landscape area is really going to be the key component that's a challenge for data collection, the biggest data collection challenge that the state's currently embarking on. And it is the state's responsibility to provide the retailers the landscape area for their residential customers by January 2021. So this is something the state is actively working on. In addition, because outdoor water use is not just residential outdoor water use, it's also dedicated irrigation landscapes and multifamily landscapes. So all of those would be included in this outdoor water use. So this is going to be the second bucket of water. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the landscape area measurements, though, what the state's doing to compile this information. So they've been working on a number of pilots. DWR has been working on a number of pilots to establish a appropriate methodology for determining landscape area for water utilities. We're very fortunate in the region. We've had two of their pilot projects have been local, one in the city of Santa Rosa, and that was really more of a beta. That was their initial pilot that they learned a whole lot from. They kind of took a step back, state kind of took a step back and then tried again with North Marin Water District and Rancho, which also was very informative. And now you can see the state's rolling out 2 additional pilots with another 27 entities. And what they're doing is they're using artificial intelligence and machine learning to create a model that will calculate the square foot area for every water utility in the state of California by January 2021. And this will provide single-family residential landscape measurement areas. The state's breaking these landscape area measurements into 3 classifications, and the district will be provided not parcel level data. They'll give us a handful to verify, but really ultimately there'll be an aggregate of the 3 categories, 3 classifications I have listed here. Irrigated, so of course like the landscape that's irrigated. Irrigable, but not irrigated, so this might be a piece of property that will be developed, or say a backyard that doesn't have landscaping yet, but the state acknowledges there will be water use associated with that site and we should get credit for that. And then finally non-irrigable, which is your hardscape, your wildland urban interface areas, etc. And so what the legislation actually determines is that the outdoor water use will be calculated based on total irrigable area, which is that irrigated and irrigable not irrigated. I know it's amazing level of detail. And so we will look forward to seeing that once the state rolls out their landscape measurements for all 410 water suppliers in the state of California. As you can imagine, there's a number of challenges associated with this level of work. And here's a handful of them. Looking at wildland urban interface areas, so that undeveloped land classification is a challenge. So where does a large parcel that backs up to a creek, where does that wildland urban face that line, where's that delineation? Something that they're working through. Looking at dedicated irrigation landscapes or accounts that are associated with residential sites. They're using county parcel data, and so a lot of times those parcel boundaries don't line up with water meter boundaries or irrigation zone boundaries, right? So you may have a strip mall that has multiple parcels that have the same irrigation system. And then also water billing classification. So all of these are just a handful of items that the state is continuing to work through as they do these pilot projects. And while it is very complicated and intensive, I do see the state making progress as they roll out these new pilots. And I'm feeling more and more confident about their process and the methodology they're using with each pilot they roll out. I do participate in their landscape measurement work groups, and they're definitely taking input from water utilities as they go through this process. So we won't know until we see our own data, of course, but they seem to be on the right track. So that's useful and encouraging. Let's see, I'm going to jump into water loss. So this is the third bucket. And so what this state is looking at here is establishing an acceptable level of system water loss and setting standards around reporting on that water loss. So this is really leveraging the SB 555 legislation that was adopted in 2015. And so the state's been working on it for the last 5 years now. And they're looking to adopt standards by the end of 2020. Just last week on the 13th, the state released their latest proposal for establishing a water loss standard. And there were 3 core components, and this is not finalized. It's something they're in the review comment period right now. But I just wanted to bring it before you to give you an idea of kind of what they're thinking and where they're going at this moment. So they're looking at an individual volumetric standard based on the state board's economic model. So what does that really mean? It would assign each water utility a connection per, an acceptable water loss per connection per day number. So for us, it's about 24 gallons per connection per day that the state has deemed acceptable for our system. And every utility would have a different number that they needed to hit. And it's based on our last 3 years of reporting that we've been doing to the state out to comply with SB 555. As I said, it's still being developed. It's not finalized. And so, we're taking a look at that economic model and establishing whether or not, or determining whether or not it makes sense for us what the state is using. And if it doesn't make sense, then we have an opportunity to send a comment letter and engage with the state on this process. In addition, they're looking at pressure and asset management data collection. So this is really submittals on or providing information on pressure and asset management. And finally, data quality is a big one. The state acknowledges that if data quality is not high or set to a specific standard, then verifying the volumetric standard has been met will be very difficult. And so they're looking at establishing submittal requirements for data quality. This, as I mentioned, this proposal has been ongoing and being refined, and it's not finalized. And so we'll see where it lands, but I just wanted to provide an update on kind of what they're currently considering.
Carrie, I have a question. What's our current water loss termination per account or per
connection per day?
meter?
So per connection per day, it ranges over the last 3 years. We've seen anywhere as low as 22 and as high as 26. So, but
a little problem.
Well, no, it's where their target for us is right kind of in the middle of where we've been hitting recently. But data quality is a big factor.
Well, and the other thing is, and I'd be happy to step into this dogfight if you'd like. My understanding, from having worked in the water business for 40 years, that the majority of, and calling it a leak or a loss is really not right, because it accounts for a lot of things. But the biggest one, as I understand it, is the difference between large meters and small meters. That there's just an inherent error in the system when you send the water out with the big meter and then you measure it with small meters. It isn't really lost, it's just unaccounted for. And I haven't read this 555. I got it up right now. We'll read it to see where they're going, because it seems like it may be a little bit of pie in the sky to me.
Larry,
Yeah.
to maybe connect you to as well, the California AWWA has been all over 555 since it was enacted. So you may want to check in with Sue Mossberg or Tim Worley is still consulting. They've got a big program to help water utilities comply, like even before the 2018, conservation as a way of California way of life legislation. So the recent legislation that Carrie's been going through really just kind of incorporates 555. So that's been going on for a while.
Yeah.
How do
Thank
they
you.
actually, how is the measurement done? I assume they just measure the total loss in the whole system and divide it by the number of meters, or do they?
You know what
No,
I-
there's a model that AWWA has developed. It's called the M36 model, and so it's a pretty intensive level of data collection and inputs to get down to real losses.
But it still measures what you put in versus what you sell.
I mean, so it's picking up losses in the pipeline of the streets as well as residential.
So it's all of those plus the fire department use for fire hydrants.
Yep.
It's everything doesn't get sold. You say you put 10 in and you sell 9.
Right.
And that's very good. If you could get a 10% loss, that's very good. The numbers we're talking about are actually higher than that.
Okay.
And and I'm a little bit surprised, Carrie, when you say that we're in between that, because I remember folks stating, as I recall, that we had a less than 10% loss, which I've always been a little suspicious of.
Yeah, percent loss is under this new methodology for utilizing AWWA's M36 model for reporting as required by SB 555. Percent loss is no longer kind of the metrics that's used for water loss.
It's the same thing. I mean, if you take in 24 gallons per connection per day and we serve 120, it's the same thing, right? It's 24 over 120. So it's still percent loss. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could get it to it that way.
Some of it, if I could just quickly note, I think comes from, right, as meters age, you get an increased amount of non-metered water. So that contributes to the loss as well. So I think the point of caution of thinking about all of this as leaks necessarily is, a bit of a caution.
Well, especially Ben, I mean, we've spent a lot of money on protection, huh? And I mean, as far as I can tell, when I go to Europe and I mention numbers like 10%, they laugh, okay, that our losses are only 10%. But I know that we do a lot of that work with listening and things like that. So we're pretty good on the leaks. But I think the key thing for the board to take away, though, it doesn't mean that we're pissing the water away. It just means it's unaccounted for. So it's I say it's a little bit like this thing is kind of chasing smoke to me. It's a great goal.
Apparently that doesn't matter within the legislation. I mean, whether it's a leak or whether it's just water that's been effectively used but not accounted for, if we don't meet the standard, that's a distinction without a difference.
Well, of course, Jack. But the problem is, if you've got something that can't be met, then, which is undoubtedly why the AWWA in California has been bitching, because, I mean, they can pass a law that says that no vehicle can go over 25 miles an hour, right? How are you going to enforce that? You could, but there's just a practical side to it. So, my point of this is we need to get very involved in this, because I think rather than just rolling over and saying, okay, we need to get a little more aggressive on it and say, guys, this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense here. Do you know who the sponsor was?
For SB 555, I don't recall who the sponsor was.
But one thing to recall,
I'm on it.
One thing to recall, Larry, I mean, we can get into a thing on AB 555. I mean, yeah. But one thing to really remember for purposes of what Carrie's going through here is that the AB 555 is being part of the budget that we have to meet. You don't have to meet each part of the budget, right? So you've got these 3 elements that Carrie's laid out, the indoor, the outdoor, and then the loss. And then that comes up with a target. But then you can meet the target any way you want. You don't have to meet the individual pieces of the target, right? So we could just say, we're just not going to deal with water loss. We're just going to decide as an organization that that's, fine, that's in our calculation, but we're not going to deal with it. We're going to meet our entire target through whatever, by dealing with commercial, outdoor landscape, or by dealing with indoor residential, you see what I mean? It doesn't match up that way.
I understand.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is an evolving standard. So I think as it continues to progress, there'll be more to come on it.
Right.
And so
Are they accepting comments about it?
they are, yes. So we have a comment period. So staff is currently reviewing the model to determine, whether or not it makes sense to us, and reviewing their current proposal, and we'll be providing comments if we deem that that's necessary.
And
So
our partners
maybe
throughout
Director Russell
California.
should chime in too.
Yeah.
It's been a very, very extensive comment period. This has been unbelievably transparent, at least in my experience. I don't know, Carrie, you may have a different one, but in my experience in California water, this is probably the most stakeholder heavy issue I've ever seen. I mean, they've got 5 different committees and stakeholder calls. I mean, it's not just that you have a chance to comment, like they basically are asking utilities to be as involved as they want to be. There's just endless opportunities, not just to comment, to be in these meetings. And anyway, it's extremely transparent, which is to their credit, I have to say.
And please run comments if we have comments, and I think we should have comments, please run them past the board before they go in.
Will do.
On the issue of who the sponsors are, Carrie has it in her report here. Friedman in the Assembly, Hertzberg in the Senate.
And that's for the Making Conservation a California Way of Life legislation, which incorporates the SB 555, but there was a separate sponsor for 555.
Oh, okay.
You'll find this interesting, Jack. I tried to get a hold of Hertzberg, and I went on to his webpage, and I wrote a detailed comment about the zero discharge wastewater. Three pages comments. Then I go to transmit it, and it says, "Oh, you're not in Senator Hertzberg's vote area," and it wouldn't take my comment. It just rejected them flat out.
A little short-sighted.
We can
A
help
little,
with that. There's
yeah.
all sorts of ways of getting your comments in. No worries.
Oh, I know. But I was hot and trotting and going and roaring and got it all done, and then it's on his webpage. So I'm typing it in live, onto this thing, and then it just disappears.
Okay.
It was kind of funny.
We should probably move on.
We're going to move on. Okay. So other than those 3 buckets, so indoor, outdoor, and water loss, there's the elephant in the room, of course, is commercial, industrial, and institutional sector. Those are not included in our budget-based objective. And the reason is that there was an acknowledgement that if the state sets standards for an acceptable level of water use within CII sector, then they could have a negative impact on economic growth within a utility service area. And so what the state is obligated to do per the legislation is to conduct studies and develop recommendations by October 1st, 2021, that really look at land use classifications to determine what is an efficient level of water use for various CII classifications. So if you have a drive-through fast food establishment, what's an acceptable level of water use for that type of business? And it will get down to that level of detail is what we're being told. But because the state is so entrenched in landscape measurements and water loss, as Cynthia noted, they have not even started on this CII sector yet, but this will be something else that will be rolled out and is included in the legislation. So we can look forward to that down the road.
One of the things we think about, Carrie, in that CII area is, I don't know if you folks have ever noticed ice cream parlors, but they have a running stream of water going across their ice cream scoops. It's unbelievable. It is a 1/8-inch diameter stream running continuously.
Yep.
It is the stupidest I have
Health
seen.
departments. It's actually mandated by the health department, and
I understand where it's from, but the point is, it's just a terrible waste of water for very little achieved. No other restaurants use things that are constantly flushed with water like that. That's just great.
Yeah, there are. So those kind of specific sector-specific items would be included in efficiency standards. Moving on to reporting. So within the legislation, there's some additional reporting requirements. So there's a monthly reporting requirement for water production, water use, and conservation efforts. This started during the drought, and of course the district complied with that reporting during the drought, and then it became voluntary when the drought ended, and the district actually has continued to provide this monthly reporting to the state. So while there is new standards adopted in April, it won't impact us because we've been continuing to provide that information to the state. The next reporting requirement is the annual urban water use objective compared to actual water use. So this is the indoor, outdoor, and water loss total that I just walked you through. So the reporting will begin in November 2023. Moving on, there's a new annual water supply and demand assessment, which is going to be required to be submitted by July of each year. And what this looks at is what is our total water supply that we have available? What is our projected demand? And do we anticipate needing to enact any stage of our water shortage contingency plan to address lack of supply to meet our demands? So the state wants to hear about this each year up front, so to allow them to be notified of areas, regions that are potentially moving into drought stages. And then finally, the urban water management plan has some additional changes in reporting, including a 5-year drought assessment. And so this, of course, is due July 1st of 2021, so it's kind of right around the corner. And staff has actually already started to work on the urban water management plan through our demand analysis work through the region, within the region. So finally, the efficiency standards gives us a little bit on timing. So in 2018, of course, the legislation was adopted. 2022, we can anticipate the state having all the standards put in place. 2023, we'll be calculating our objectives. 2024 is when we do our first reporting. And then in 2027 there's an expectation that all water suppliers will reach their objective. And that's really the timing. 2027 is when the state board can start actively engaging water utilities who are not on track to meet those objectives. And with that, the conclusion of my presentation. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
That was really thorough, Carrie. Thank you. My questions have been answered. Any other board questions on this?
No.
Okay. That brings us to the end of our agenda. Oh, I should just check and see if there's any public comment on this.
There's no public comment.
Okay. I think that brings us to the end of our agenda. Anything else from you, Ben?
No.
All right.
Director Kohler, may I make one quick point before we conclude? So since there was an issue with the live stream, I confirm that any members of the public would be able to still participate in today's meeting using the Zoom link on today's agenda, and also participate by calling in using the number that's provided on the agenda. So that would allow public participation during today's meeting. I would also like to note, just to confirm that everything worked and it worked flawlessly. So a big shout out to Jeannie and Bush Charisse.
Yeah.
I did attend today's meeting as a member of the public using the name Water User, and the live stream worked flawlessly. So big shout out to them.
Great.
Good.
All right. Thanks very much. Unless there's anything else, I think we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Everybody,
Okay.
have a good
Thank
day.
you.
Well,
Again, Jeannie and Carrie.
Thank you.
Hey.
Have a great day.
thank you guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Hey, girly.